Canada. It's a word we all know. You hear it, and you picture this vast country, right? Second largest in the world, maple leaves, the whole thing.
A G7 nation, multicultural cities, immense forests. It's a word with a huge modern meaning.
Exactly. But if you peel back all of that history, all that modern context, the word itself comes from, well, a mistake. It's a misunderstanding of a Huron-Iroquois word.
It means village.
Just village. It's incredible.
It might just be the most successful typo in history. Think about it. A word for a small group of houses ends up on a map covering almost 10 million square kilometers.
And the man who made that mistake, Jacques Cartier, he didn't even want a village. He was looking for something much, much bigger.
He was looking for China, for the Spice Islands. He was part of that great European push west, trying to find a shortcut to the riches of Asia. Canada was, to him, just an obstacle.
And that's what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into the source material around Jacques Cartier, his own ship logs, contemporary accounts, and the historical context of 16th century France. Our mission here is to really unpack the story of his 3 big voyages. This is a man who promised his king gold, diamonds, and a route to Asia. And what he delivered was a really big river, some shiny rocks, and one of the worst winters imaginable.
It is a perfect story of expectation just colliding head-on with reality. But when you look at the logs, what really comes through is the psychology of it all.
What do you mean?
The psychology of the explorer. You see how desperate they were to find what they were sent to find? They would look at a frozen Canadian river, completely impassable, and convince themselves it was the highway to Shanghai.
And it's not just a story about getting lost. It's about the human element. We're going to get into the kidnappings, the fool's gold, and the incredibly complex and often tragic relationship with the indigenous peoples he met.
It is a messy, messy story. Cartier gets held up as this great discoverer. But the sources show us a man who is often in way over his head, frequently improvising, and making some really questionable moral choices.
So let's start at the beginning. Before he's got a bridge, the name on a bridge or a park, who was Jacques Cartier, the notes put him in Saint-Malo, which I understand was a bit of a rough and tumble place.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
Understanding Saint-Malo is key to understanding Cartier. It's this granite fortress of a city on the coast of Brittany. And in the 16th century, it wasn't just a fishing town, it was a nest of corsairs.
So pirates.
State-sanctioned pirates, which is an important distinction. Privateers. These were sailors who were legally allowed by the king to raid enemy shipping. So if you grew up in Saint-Malo, you grew up in a culture of very aggressive, very skilled seamanship. You had to be tough.
But Cartier himself wasn't a corsair, was he? The records make him sound a bit more respectable.
He was. He was born in 1491, not into nobility, but he was a striver. He was ambitious. The real turning point for his social status was his marriage in 1520 to a woman named Mary Catherine de Grange.
And her family was a step up.
A big step up. They were aristocratic. It was the classic move of marrying into a higher social class, and it worked for him. If you look at the local records from Saint-Malo after that, his name starts popping up all over the place as a godfather, as a witness at important events.
He's becoming a man of influence.
Exactly. He's building a reputation as a respectable, trustworthy mariner. And in that world, that trust was the currency you needed to get command of a ship, let alone a royal expedition.
So how does he make that jump? From trusted local guy in Saint-Malo to standing in front of the King of France, Francis I, asking for ships? That's a huge leap.
He had a patron, a man named Jean Le Veneur, who was the Bishop of Saint-Malo and an abbot at Mont-Saint-Michel, a very powerful man. He basically arranged the introduction. He went to the king and vouched for Cartier.
And what was his pitch?
Le Veneur told the king that Cartier was an experienced navigator who had already been to the New World, probably on fishing trips to Newfoundland or even as far as Brazil. And he said Cartier was the man who could find the fabled Western Passage to Asia.
You have to remember the context here. It's 1534. Spain is just drowning in wealth from the Americas.
They're literally hauling silver and gold out of Mexico and Peru by the shipload. Fleets of it. And France is just watching this, feeling completely left out.
A massive case of national FOMO.
That's the perfect way to put it. Francis I famously complained that he wanted to see the clause in Adam's will that divided the world between Spain and Portugal and left France out.
Yeah.
He wanted his share.
So the commission he gives Cartier is very specific.
Very. It wasn't go and map some new lands for science.
Yeah.
The orders were crystal clear. Find a western route to the wealthy markets of the East, end quote. Discover certain islands and lands where it is said that a great quantity of gold and other precious things are to be found.
Gold and spices, that's the engine of the whole enterprise.
That's it. So Cartier sets off on his first voyage, April 20th, 1534. And when you look at the log, he just flies across the Atlantic.
How fast are we talking?
20 days.
Yeah.
Which is astonishingly fast for a 16th century wooden ship.
Mm-hmm.
It really shows you he was a master of the North Atlantic winds and currents. This is not his first time out there.
So he arrives off Newfoundland, sails through the Strait of Belle Isle, and enters the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And this is where we get one of those details from the logs that just, it makes you stop and shudder a bit. The islands of the birds.
Yeah, yes. What are now called the Roches-Oiseaux.
The crew is low on fresh meat. They see these islands just covered in birds, great auks we now know, flightless, defenseless birds, and the crew goes ashore.
And they just unleash a slaughter. The log is very matter-of-fact about it. It says they killed about 1,000 of them.
1,000.
They filled 2 longboats with bird carcasses in under half an hour. Then they salted barrels and barrels of them for the rest of the voyage. To them, this wasn't an act of cruelty. It was just stocking the pantry.
It's just such a stark image of how they saw this new world, not as an ecosystem, but as a warehouse of resources there for the taking.
The concept of conservation or ecological limits was completely alien to them. They saw an abundance that they assumed was infinite. Of course, we know the great auk is now extinct.
So they stock up on birds and continue on, looking for people who can point the way to China.
And they have a few encounters. On the north side of Chaleur Bay, they meet a group, probably Micmac. There's some cautious trading. But the whole mood of the voyage changes when they sail into Gaspé Bay.
This is where they meet the St. Lawrence Iroquoians.
Yes, a large group of about 200 people who had come down from their main settlements upriver to fish for mackerel for the summer. Their leader is a chief named Donnacona.
And at first, things are okay, right?
They are. The log describes some singing and dancing, gifts being exchanged. It's wary, but it's not hostile. But then, on July 24th, Cartier does something that completely changes the dynamic.
He plants the cross.
A massive one, 10 meters high, that's over 30 feet. And he attaches a shield to it with the French fleur-de-lis and carves the words, Vive le roi de France. Long live the King of France.
Now, did he think they wouldn't understand what that meant? Was it naive, or was it a provocation?
Oh, he knew what he was doing. And what's really fascinating is that Donnacona knew exactly what he was doing, too.
He didn't need a translator for that symbol.
Not at all. He saw this giant foreign totem being planted on his people's land. The sources say he got in his canoe, came out to Cartier's ship dressed in an old bearskin, and just let him have it. He made this long speech, pointing at the cross and then at the land around them, making it clear, this is ours. You can't just put up a big stick and claim it.
And Cartier's response is, less than honest?
It's pure deception. He invites them aboard, gives them food and drink, and tells them the cross is no big deal. It's just a landmark, a navigational beacon to help them find the harbor when they come back.
Which is a complete lie.
A total lie. But it calms the situation down enough for him to get close to Donnacona's 2 sons, Domagaya and Taigadni. And this is where the first kidnapping takes place.
He just grabs them.
It's a bit more complex. He dresses them in French clothes, gives them gifts, and then essentially coerces their father into letting him take them to France. The deal, as Donnacona understood it, was that they would be brought back the following year with a shipload of European goods.
But just imagine being one of those sons. You've lived your whole life in a village on the St. Lawrence River, and now you're on this creaking wooden ship sailing into a world you can't even conceive of.
It had to be utterly terrifying. But for Cartier, they were his proof of concept. He could go back to the king, show him these 2 men, have them learn French, and get them to tell the king about the great river that led west. They were his ticket to a second voyage.
And it works like a charm, because in May of 1535, he's back. And this time, he's not just exploring, he means business.
This is voyage number 2, a much bigger expedition. 3 ships this time, the Grand Hermine, the Petite Hermine, and the smaller Emerillon. He has a crew of 110 men. And crucially, he has his 2 guides, Donnacona's sons.
And this is the voyage where he actually sails up the river.
This is it. This is the first documented European navigation of the St. Lawrence River. Guided by the 2 sons, he sails past Anticosti Island and realizes this isn't just a bay. This is a massive waterway leading deep into the continent.
And this brings us to the name, the Canada mistake. I just love this part of the story.
It's a perfect example of 2 cultures completely talking past each other. As they're sailing upriver, they're heading for the Iroquoian capital, a place called Stadacona.
Which is near modern-day Quebec City.
Exactly. And the 2 guides are pointing ahead, and they use the word kanata.
Meaning village.
Right. They're just saying the village is just ahead. But Cartier hears kanata, and on his charts, he writes it down as the name for the entire region.
He thinks that's what the whole country is called.
He does, and the name just sticks. First it applied to that small area, then it expanded to the whole north shore of the river, and eventually, centuries later, it becomes the name for the second largest country on Earth, all from one little misunderstanding.
So they get to Stadacona, they meet Donnacona again. The reunion must have been tense.
I imagine so. But also a relief for Donnacona, seeing his sons returned. But Cartier isn't satisfied with Stadacona. He has gold fever. He's hearing stories from the locals about another, bigger settlement further upriver, a place called Hochelaga.
And Donnacona doesn't want him to go.
No, Donnacona tries everything to stop him. He probably wanted to control the French and monopolize any trade. He tells Cartier the river is too dangerous, that there are monsters. He even has 3 men dress up as devils with long horns and blackened faces to try and scare the French away.
That's a theatrical.
It is, but Cartier isn't buying it. He accuses them of trickery and says his god will protect him. He leaves his 2 main ships and most of his men at Stadacona and pushes upriver in the smallest vessel, the Emerillon.
To Hochelaga, which is basically Montreal.
It's on the island of Montreal, yes. And when he gets there, the place is much more impressive than Stadacona. It's a large, fortified village with a triple palisade surrounded by vast fields of corn. The log says a crowd of over 1,000 people came out to greet them.
He's a celebrity.
He is. They carry him on their shoulders. They bring their sick for him to touch, as if he's a healer. He reads from the Gospel of John. It's this moment of incredible cultural collision. But Cartier has one thing on his mind.
China.
He is led to the top of the mountain that dominates the island. He names it Mount Royal, which is where we get the name Montreal.
And he looks out to the west over the Ottawa River, and he's expecting
What?
the Pacific Ocean.
He's expecting to see a clear path, a waterway that will take him to Asia. He is so close he can taste it. And instead, what he sees is just water, but it's white. It's frothing.
Rapids.
Vicious, impassable rapids. And you have to understand, for a 16th century sailing ship, rapids are not an inconvenience. They are a brick wall, a dead end.
Hitting a rock in that current would be the end of the ship and everyone on it.
Instantly. So he's standing there on Mount Royal, and his entire dream of a Northwest Passage just dies right in front of his eyes. The disappointment must have been absolutely crushing.
But the irony, and I love this part, the irony is that he was so convinced that China was just on the other side of that white water that the area eventually got a nickname.
It did. The rapids and the town that grew up near them became known as Lachine.
The China Rapids.
It's a joke that's literally carved into the map of Canada. It's a permanent monument to his stubborn delusion. He couldn't accept that this was a new continent with its own geography. He had to force it into his pre-existing mental map.
So he hits this wall, he has to turn back, he sails back downriver to Stadacona. But there's a problem. He's been upriver too long.
He has. By the time he gets back, it's mid-October. And as anyone who's spent time in Quebec can tell you, winter doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives.
And Cartier, a man from the relatively mild maritime climate of Brittany, has absolutely no idea what he's in for.
He is about to face a full-blown Canadian continental winter, and is going to destroy his expedition.
This part of the log, it reads like a horror story. They haul their ships into a small tributary, build a makeshift fort, and then the world just freezes around them.
The river freezes solid. The log says the ice was more than 2 fathoms thick. That's over 3.5 meters. The ships were locked in place. The snow on the shore was over 1 meter deep.
They are trapped.
Completely trapped. And they're living in the hulls of these ships, which are basically frozen wooden caves. He writes that the inside walls were covered in ice 4 fingers thick. It's dark, it's cramped, the food is spoiling.
And then the disease starts.
Scurvy. We know today it's just a simple vitamin C deficiency, but to them it was a terrifying, mysterious plague. They had no idea what caused it or how to stop it.
The descriptions are just gruesome.
They are. Cartier writes about how his men's legs would swell up and turn black and purple like they were bruised. Their gums would rot away, becoming so putrid that their teeth would just loosen and fall out.
Fall out of their heads.
Yes. And strangest of all, old wounds, scars from years before, would suddenly reopen and start to fester. It was like their bodies were just falling apart from the inside out.
It's a nightmare. How many men were affected?
Pretty much everyone. By mid-February, Cartier writes that out of his 110 men, there weren't even 10 who were healthy enough to care for the others. Men were dying every day. They stopped trying to bury them because the ground was frozen solid. They just hid the bodies in snowdrifts around the fort.
It's so grim. There's a note on an old Spanish map from around that time. It points to that very spot and says simply, "Here many French died of hunger."
They were facing total annihilation. They were all going to die there, frozen in the ice. And the only reason they didn't is the Iroquoians.
The very people he had been, manipulating and lying to.
Exactly. Cartier noticed that Domagaya, one of the sons he'd kidnapped, had been sick with the same symptoms, but had suddenly made a full recovery. He was walking around healthy.
So Cartier, in complete desperation, goes and asks him for the secret.
He does. And Domagaya tells him about a specific tree, which he calls a neta. We think it was probably eastern white cedar, maybe a type of spruce.
And what do they do with it?
Domagaya teaches them to boil the bark and the needles to make a tea, a decoction. It would have been incredibly rich in vitamin C and also ascorbic acid.
It's the miracle cure.
It was. Cartier writes that at first his men were suspicious. They didn't want to drink this strange tree bark tea. But 2 or 3 of them tried it, and within a day or 2 they started to feel better.
And then it was a frenzy.
A complete frenzy. He says they stripped a tree as large as any I ever saw, completely bare in less than a week. And it worked. It just worked. The scurvy was cured.
The irony is just staggering. The man he kidnapped is the only reason his expedition survived.
It's a powerful lesson in interdependence. But Cartier, being Cartier, repays this incredible act of humanity in a very characteristic way.
Let me guess. It involves another kidnapping.
You guessed it. Spring finally arrives, the ice breaks up, it's time to go home. But what does he have to show for it? He lost 25 men. He didn't find a passage to China. He didn't find any gold.
A story about a miracle tree isn't going to impress the king.
Not enough to fund a third voyage. He needs something more spectacular. He needs a story about gold. And he decides the best person to tell that story is the chief himself, Donnacona.
So this is where the mythical kingdom of Saguenay comes into play. What was that exactly?
That's the million-franc question. The Iroquoians, Donnacona included, have been telling Cartier stories about a wealthy kingdom to the north, up the Saguenay River, a place where people were as white as in France, wore woolen clothes, and had vast amounts of gold, rubies, and other precious metals.
Was any of it true?
It's hard to say. One theory is that it was a garbled description of a real indigenous trade network. Maybe they were describing copper from the Great Lakes, and Cartier, in his gold-obsessed mind, just heard gold.
Or they were just telling him what he wanted to hear.
That's the other more cynical theory, that the Iroquoians were smart. They figured out what these strange, bearded men wanted more than anything. This is this yellow metal. So they're like, oh, the gold, yeah, lots of it. But it's not here, it's way over there. You should go look for it.
Who bothered the people in Saguenay?
Precisely. It was a clever way to try and get rid of them. But Cartier bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. He needed it to be real.
So he decides to take Donnacona back to France to tell this story to the king himself.
He hatches a plot. He pretends to be having a celebration, lures Donnacona, the 2 sons, and several other headmen into his fort, and then he seizes them. He captures the entire leadership of Stadacona.
And sails for France. He promised the people he'd bring them back in a year.
A promise he had no intention of keeping. None of them ever saw their home again. They all died in France within a few years.
But Donnacona did his job first.
He did. Before he died, he was presented at court. And he told King Francis the first incredible tales of the Kingdom of Saguenay. Fantastical stories of one-legged men, people who could fly, and a kingdom overflowing with gold.
And the king believed it.
The king was hooked. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. He immediately began planning a third voyage. But this time, the entire objective had changed. It's now 1541. 5 years have passed. The goal is no longer just exploration or finding a passage. The king's orders are for colonization. He wants to build a permanent French settlement, claim the territory, and find and exploit the riches of Saguenay.
But there's a catch for Cartier. A big one.
A very big one. He's the expert. He's the only one who really knows the St. Lawrence. But the king doesn't put him in charge of the whole enterprise.
Who gets the job?
A nobleman, a courtier, and a soldier named Jean-François de la Roque de Roberval. He's named Lieutenant General of Canada. Cartier is demoted to Chief Navigator.
Ouch. That must have stung.
It was a class thing. Colonization was seen as a military and aristocratic venture. Cartier was a commoner, a sailor from Saint-Malo. He wasn't considered high status enough to lead it. But this decision effectively doomed the mission from the start because Cartier and Roberval did not get along.
And their coordination was a mess from day one.
A total mess. Roberval was delayed, waiting for artillery and more supplies. He told Cartier to sail on ahead with 5 ships and about 1,500 people. Cartier left in May 1541.
1,500 people. That's not an expedition. That's an invasion force.
It is. It includes settlers, soldiers, even livestock. This is meant to be permanent.
So Cartier arrives back at Stadacona. He has to face the Iroquoians, now led by a new chief, Donnacona. And he has to explain what happened to Donnacona and the others.
And again, he lies. He tells them Donnacona died in France, which was true. But he claims the other chiefs had become great lords, married French women, and had chosen to stay in France and live in luxury.
Did anyone believe him?
Not for a second. The log says Donnacona pretended to be happy about it, probably because Donnacona was his political rival, but the trust was completely shattered. The French were now seen as kidnappers and liars.
So Stadacona is no longer a safe place for them.
No. Cartier recognizes the danger. The Iroquoians are openly hostile. So he abandons Stadacona and sails a few miles upriver to a high cliff at the mouth of the Cap Rouge River. And there, he builds the first fortified European settlement in what is now Canada. He calls it Charlesbourg-Royal.
And they actually try to make a go of it. They plant crops.
They do. The log says they planted cabbage, turnip, and lettuce, which grew well. They built 2 forts, one at the base of the cliff and one at the top. They were settling in for the long haul. And then the men started finding something in the rocks.
Here we go.
The gold fever returns with a vengeance. They find these shiny yellow specks in the slate cliffs. And down by the river, they find loads of these hard, clear stones that glitter in the sun like, well,
diamonds.
Diamonds. Cartier is beyond excited. He is convinced he's finally found it. The wealth of Saguenay. He packs barrels and barrels of the stuff. He believes he's about to become the richest man in France.
But while they're digging for diamonds, the situation outside the fort is getting worse.
Much worse. They are essentially living under siege. The Iroquoians, who now vastly outnumber them, refuse to trade. They begin a campaign of guerrilla warfare, attacking any small group of French who wandered too far from the fort.
We don't have Cartier's full log for that winter, do we?
No, it's lost to history. But later accounts from sailors on the voyage tell us that at least 35 of the settlers were killed in these skirmishes. It was a brutal, terrifying winter. And Cartier is stuck there. He's got his barrels of treasure, but he's surrounded by enemies. Winter is setting in, and his boss, Roberval, is nowhere to be seen.
So he makes a decision.
He decides to cut his losses and run. In early June of 1542, he makes the call to abandon Charlesbourg-Royal. He packs up all his gold and diamonds, loads everyone onto the ships, and flees for France.
And this leads to maybe the most dramatic scene in the entire story. He's sailing home. He pulls into the harbor at St. John's, Newfoundland to get supplies. Yeah. And who should be sailing in?
His boss, Jean-François de Roberval, finally arriving from France with his 3 ships and 200 more settlers.
That has to be the most awkward meeting in the history of exploration.
Oh, hello, boss. Funny seeing you here. I was just quitting. Roberval is absolutely furious. He's just crossed the Atlantic, and his chief navigator is running away. He holds a council and formally orders Cartier to turn his ships around and sail back to the colony with him.
A direct order from his commanding officer?
Yes. But Cartier thinks he has an ace up his sleeve. He has the diamonds. He has the gold. He believes he is carrying a fortune that will make the king forgive any act of insubordination.
So he disobeys the order?
In the most flagrant way possible. During the night, he has his sailors quietly weigh anchor, and under the cover of darkness, he slips his ships out of the harbor. He deserts his commander and his mission. He ghosts him.
That's unbelievable. That's a court-martial offense. Treason, even.
It is. But he's betting everything on that cargo. He sails back to France, he gets his audience with the king, he presents his barrels of treasure, and the royal Auxayers get to work.
And the verdict comes in?
The gold is iron pyrite, fool's gold. The diamonds are quartz crystals. They're all completely, utterly worthless.
Oh, the humiliation. You abandon a colony, you defy your commander, you risk everything for a boatload of gravel.
The failure was so total, so spectacular, that it actually became a part of the French language. Yeah. For centuries after, there was a common proverb, faux comme les diamants du Canada.
As false as Canadian diamonds.
Exactly. If you wanted to say something was a complete fraud, a total sham, you compared it to Cartier's great discovery.
And what happened to Roberval, the guy he abandoned in Newfoundland?
Roberval, to his credit, carried on. He sailed to the abandoned fort at Charlesbourg-Royal, re-established the colony, and tried to stick it out for the winter.
How did that go for him?
It was a catastrophe. The winter was just as brutal. Scurvy came back with a vengeance. 50 settlers died from it, and the attacks on the Iroquoians were relentless. By the spring of 1543, he gave up, packed up the survivors, and sailed home.
So the whole colonization effort was a complete failure.
An expensive and deadly failure. And because of it, France completely lost interest in Canada. They basically wrote it off as a frozen, worthless wasteland full of hostile people and fake diamonds. They wouldn't make another serious attempt at colonization for more than 60 years until Samuel de Champlain arrived in the early 1600s.
And Cartier, what becomes of him after all this?
He retires in disgrace to his estate near Saint-Malo. He lives out his days quietly, occasionally working as a Portuguese interpreter for the local courts. He dies in 1557 during an outbreak of typhus, a pretty anticlimactic end for the man who named Canada.
But the story doesn't quite end there, because for centuries, the exact location of that failed colony, Charlesbourg-Royal, was lost.
That's right. People knew it was near Cap Rouge, but the precise spot was a mystery until very recently.
2006, I think.
Yes, in 2006, a team of Canadian archaeologists finally found it. They uncovered the remains of the timber forts, blacksmith forges, and most tellingly, a very specific piece of pottery. A fragment of a beautiful, ornate Italian ceramic plate. It's called Fononza Istoriata ware, made between 1540 and 1550. This wasn't the kind of thing a common sailor or a farmer would own. This was high-end, luxury dinnerware.
It had to belong to an aristocrat.
It almost certainly belonged to Roberval himself. It's this tiny, tangible piece of the French Renaissance court found shattered and buried in the Canadian soil. It's the proof. It's the whole story real.
It's amazing. It connects that whole grand, doomed enterprise right back to a single person eating his dinner while a Canadian winter howled outside.
And dreaming of Saguenay.
So when we zoom out and look at the whole picture, how do we assess Jacques Cartier? He was looking for Asia, he found a river, he wanted gold, he found quartz, he heard the word for village and thought it was a country.
It's a legacy of failure that somehow became a success. He failed at every single one of his stated objectives. He didn't find the passage. He didn't find any wealth. His colony was a disaster. But in failing, he was the first European to penetrate, map, and describe the gateway to the North American continent. The St. Lawrence River. He put it on the map. He gave the place its name. Without Cartier's voyages and charts, Champlain would have had nowhere to start. Cartier opened the door, even if he couldn't see what was on the other side.
And his treatment of the Iroquoians, the kidnappings, that set a tone, didn't it?
It did. It set a precedent for deceit and mistrust that poisoned relations for a long time. He was a brilliant navigator. He never lost a ship at sea, which is remarkable, but his diplomacy was dishonorable even by the standards of his own time.
So he's not the discoverer of Canada? We know Vikings and Basque fishermen were there long before him.
No, but he is the first to systematically explore and map the interior waterway. That's his real, lasting contribution.
It all comes back to mistakes, doesn't it? A story of mistaken geography with China, mistaken geology with the diamonds, and a mistaken translation with the name Canada.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with. Cartier kidnapped a chief to have him tell the king a story about a mythical kingdom of gold called Saguenay. Was Saguenay just a tall tale the Iroquoians told to get the French to leave them alone? Or was it a genuine misunderstanding of a real trade network?
And think about this. The false diamonds of Canada became a proverb for a sham. They were forgotten. But the false name for the country, Canada, the village, that mistake became a nation. What does it say about how history works? That sometimes the errors are the things that last the longest.
A question worth thinking about.
On that note, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the river to nowhere. It's been a fascinating and very complicated journey.